Hi. Do you hate it when somebody interrupts you? Did you grow up learn that you shouldn't interrupt somebody, you should let them speak until they're done? Well, the truth of the matter is it's not quite that black and white. It's actually quite nuanced, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that with you. But, oh, wait, I know what you're going to say, and if you can just hold on, I will address that point in a minute. Um, Generally speaking, if you are in a conversation and you are repeatedly interrupting the person, you have an agenda. The person that you're interrupting may or may not realize that you have an agenda, but you do. And that agenda is sometimes positive and sometimes negative. Now, you may think that interrupting somebody repeatedly is always going to be negative, but think about it this way. If the interruption acts as an emphasis of what you're saying, as an affirmation of what you're saying, then that person is boosting you rather than breaking your stride or trying to stop you from saying what you're saying. So, like if you go to a very active church where people are very expressive, and I'm not a religious person, but if you do, and the preacher's talking and everybody's saying hallelujah, praise God, and those are interruptions, but they are affirmative, they are supportive, and therefore these are interruptions that are acceptable. Now, if you're in the same church and the preacher's talking and suddenly somebody says, yeah, but Jesus also said, and then the preacher tries to continue with it, and the person says, yeah, but John over there did that, and you go on, and the person goes on, and it's really basically the interrupter is trying to undermine the preacher. These are completely different situations in the same setting. So that is one example of when an interruption is good and when an interruption is bad. Now, if you, I recently had a conversation, and coincidentally, it was with a preacher, and I'm deist, and he's obviously Christian, and he was asking me questions about deism, and he knows about deism, at least he said he knows about deism, although he'd never heard of warm deism. And he asked me a question, and honestly, I don't even remember the question. And the reason I don't remember the question is because he kept on interrupting me while I was trying to express my answer to the point where I got aggravated, and so I've kind of just like wiped that question from my mind. But basically, so he asked me this question, and I guess you could say I am sometimes a verbal thinker. I can think without talking, but sometimes I find it easier to figure things out by talking it out or writing it out. And that's because in the case of writing it out, I can put it on paper or more likely on a computer, and then I can organize it and make it look better, make it flow better and stuff. If I'm doing it verbally, then I can bounce ideas off of somebody. So this was a question that I didn't really have a very complete answer for. It was a question I was actually uncertain of the answer for. So he was actually asking me to speculate on something that I didn't really fully know the answer to. And so I was doing that. I was verbally speculating, and I was trying to lay the groundwork and stuff, and he interrupted me. But he asked the same question again. So I started to, carry on my my exploration to find the answer. And after a minute or so, he interrupted me again. And I tried again to start, and again he interrupted me. Now, that was showing me that, so let me backtrack a second. When this man approached me, I was at a food pantry, which was located in a church, and this man, he said that he would love to talk to me about, my beliefs, because I had told him I was a deist, and we hadn't really had much of an opportunity to talk, and he had come across as being somebody who was actually interested in hearing my thoughts. And this is actually a common tactic of people who really don't believe what you think, and they don't really care what you think, but they come across in a very sincere way, to the point that they open you the door to having a conversation with you, and you feel like, oh, well, maybe this person is at least going to respectfully listen, and if maybe not like change their opinion, but at least they're going to listen. And so I was kind of hesitant, because pastors tend to be, on average anyways, fairly strongly invested in what they're doing. I mean, it is, after all, their job, if not their mission. And so when we finally sat down to have this conversation, and he started interrupting me like this, it became patently obvious to me that he didn't really care what I believed, and that his goal was to undermine me or convert me, to proselytize. And fortunately, his wife came by and said, hey, we've got to get going. So I was really relieved, because this guy was not going to let me answer the question. And I was pretty sure that the next interruption that he was going to make was going to be to undermine me in a more direct way than what he had been doing. Because basically what he'd been doing was like, yeah, but what's the answer? Yeah, but what's the answer? I was pretty sure that the next interruption was going to be a more confrontational interruption. And that's an example of a bad interruption. Now, a couple months ago, I had just finished, I had been selling the FCC's Lifeline tablets with some other people who do that, or did that. I don't do it anymore. It's not my thing, you know. But we were done, and we were driving back home, and so the four of us were in the car, and I was talking to the guy in the back who was a recovering alcoholic, and he had been telling me some stuff, and I was telling him some stuff, and we kept on interrupting each other, and it was great, though, because this was a very productive conversation, because I realized when I was listening to him that there were certain things that he didn't realize, and so I would lay something on him. I would tell him something and explain it, and then he'd be like, "Oh yeah," and then he would add to it, which was fantastic, and then I would add to what he was saying, and then when we were done with that, I would go on to the next point in trying to make him aware of the things that he was missing, and it would do it again. We'd build on each other, and we'd interrupt each other, and it was an okay thing to do. So that was a perfectly acceptable situation for you know. So when you're having maybe a creative conversation, or you are having a conversation where it's revelatory or it's somehow empowering, interruptions can, if done correctly, be very, very good. And then there are the bad ones. So if somebody had come in and said, I get what you're saying, but, honestly, that hasn't worked for me. And, then you have a choice. You can say, okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Not everything works for everybody. Or you could dig into it. Now, you could dig into it in the sense of not returning the negative vibe that the person is giving, that they're downplaying what you're suggesting, but to return it in a positive way. And what I mean by that is you say, okay, so what did you do? And you listen to them. And you don't interrupt, because you want to get all the information. Once you have that information from them, if they didn't give you any details, if there are things that are omitted, like how many times they did it a day, or how many weeks they did it, or how many months they did it, or what time of day, or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't have to be about time. It just has to be there might be missing information, and that's quite common in a conversation like this, that a person will, who is trying to undermine you, will omit facts. And the reason that they omit facts is because they are aware that those facts don't support their statement. And they also, they may not consciously be aware that what they're doing is deceitful, but in essence, they failed to do what you had been describing, and rather than own up to the fact or admit the fact that they had been wrong, they decided, well, yeah, it didn't work for me because I screwed up, but I'm not going to say that, so I'm just going to make this person, look kind of bad, and I'm going to say, hey, it doesn't work for everybody, and maybe that'll discourage this other person, and because maybe that person will fail too, just like I did, or maybe I don't want that person to succeed. There are multiple reasons that motivate somebody to do that. So you just keep on digging until you get all the facts. Once you have all the facts, then you can, and this is a point where you have an opportunity to make it or break it. And what I mean by that is you break it by picking at them for the way they failed. Okay, you make them feel bad about themselves. They already feel bad about themselves. They don't need that. Okay, so you may be upset with this person for trying to undermine you or something like that, but the truth of the matter is this person already probably feels down because they failed to achieve what you are trying to help this other person achieve. But going after them just is not going to help. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help that person, and it may also make you look bad to the person you were trying to help initially. So instead, you can say, you know what? In listening to this, to what you've said, here's what I hear. Here's what I hear you did, and it's called active listening. So you just repeat back to the person and say, "Is that correct? Did I miss anything?" And if they say that yes, you missed something, well, okay, what was it? And then you try to tweak it and get it very specific, and then you say, okay, here's what I'm hearing now, and then you make sure it's correct. And yes, it's a sock. I use this on my computer, okay? Get over it. Hi! Don't interrupt me, okay? Sorry! Yeah. So, then what you do is say, look, I hear what you're saying, and I can sense that you're frustrated. What I'd like to do is I'd like to help you. So, what I've noticed in what you've explained to me is that you were doing it right, except for this part. So what I want to suggest is, and you don't have to, but if you really want to be able to move on with this issue, then what you should try doing is this. And be careful about how you word it. So if you word it the wrong way, it's either going to come across as too weak or too forceful. So you want to kind of choose language that is firm but not forceful. Okay? So I'd like you to, every day for the next 30 days, because it usually takes at least 30 days to change a habit. If it's a normal habit, if it's an addiction, it's a lot longer. But for the next 30 days, every day when you get up in the morning, I want you to look in the mirror and smile and say good morning with a very, very cheerful voice. And then throughout the morning, when people say good morning to you, I want you to smile at them with a nice big smile that is authentic. Okay, so don't just go like, okay, because that's not an authentic smile. And this is like I'm forcing myself to smile because you're smiling at me, asshole. Go away. No, you want to smile like you want to have it showing up here. Okay, a real smile. Okay, so give them a real smile. Say good morning. How are you? So speak with enthusiasm, with cheerfulness, with friendliness, and I just want you to do that for 30 days. And at the end of the 30 days, if you are still not, and again, this is just an example. It doesn't have to be smiling and saying good morning and stuff. But if at the end of 30 days it isn't working for you, it isn't helping you, well, then we need to revisit this and try something else. But generally speaking, with most people, except for people that have certain neurotic or psychotic conditions, it's going to work. Okay. Or if you have an addiction, okay, that's also going to be a more challenging situation. Now, I'm not an addict. I'm not a recovering addict. I'm lying. I am an addict. I am an addict when it comes to video games, especially. I used to be very much a TV addict, and I actually had to stop having a TV in my home. Now my big problem is watching YouTube videos, but most of the time I watch YouTube videos that are educational. So that's, kind of acceptable, but still I watch too much. So I am an addict, but a different kind of addict than what typically people would imagine when they think of, they think of shooting up drugs and stuff like that, or kind of drugs. I'm not one of those. My addiction is video games, and I'm pretty fond of chocolate too. But I'm not an addict. I'm a chocophiliac, I guess you could say, not a phobic. Okay, so please don't interrupt me until later. You can ask me questions later. Sometimes interrupting a person like me, I kind of get distracted easily. That can be a bad thing for one of two reasons. Okay, you may distract somebody with the best of intentions, and as a result, that person's train of thought gets derailed. Especially if it's not something that they had prepared to talk about and it's just kind of off-the-cuff conversation. If a person that you're talking to has problems with their memory, it's best not to interrupt them if they are not doing a prepared conversation. On the other hand, some people will do that because they know you have trouble maintaining a train of thought, you have memory issues or whatever. Also, interrupting somebody and causing them to forget what they were talking about can be a sign to you, if somebody's doing that to you, that the person isn't really interested in what you have to say. And that can be a big clue as to what kind of relationship that person really wants with you. So if you're talking and they ask you a question and you start to explain and then they cut you off and change the subject, or they start talking about something related, but basically taking over the conversation, that is an indication to you that they don't respect you and they don't really have an interest in you, and they're there for a specific reason, and that specific reason is more important than what they were asking you about. So they were just asking you to be polite, but they really don't care. And that isn't always necessarily a malevolent or bad thing. It may just be the person is in a rush. Like me, I can be a very focused person. So I might come across as being kind of rude sometimes, because I'll walk up to somebody, I'll say, hey, and I won't exchange pleasantries with them. I may interrupt what they're doing at the moment, because in my mind at least, I feel that what I'm doing is important and I need an answer right away, because I don't want to stand around for the next 5 minutes waiting for this person to be done with the conversation they're having, when I could just give 30 seconds of their time and be on my way. And I personally feel that that's a viable reason, or a valid reason for interrupting somebody who's already in a conversation. But sometimes I forget to interrupt in the right way because I'm just too focused. So that can be a situation in which the person isn't trying to be dismissive or rude or anything like that. It's just the way we think sometimes, because I do have memory problems. I do sometimes I do forget, even if it's something that like I'll get up, go to where it is that I need to do or get the thing, whatever it is, and by the time I'm there, I have forgotten. And a large part. Whoa. Sorry, my cat's playing with boxes. He's interrupting me. Stop that! Yeah, what was I talking about? So it can be a problem for me in terms of remembering what I was going to say. It can also be a problem for me that even if it is important to me, I can just lose my train of thought. And I can lose the train of thought by interrupting myself, by diverging from the main point to make a sub-point that supports what I'm saying, and by the time I get back to the main point, I've forgotten what the main point was. Or it could be a sub-point that distracts me from a sub-point. Basically digression or a segue, and then my train is derailed and I can't get it back on the right track. But again, you may be in a situation where somebody asks you a question and they then interrupt you while you're answering that question, and you try to answer their question and they interrupt you again. Now, if you are talking to somebody and there is no real urgency. I mean, they could manufacture an urgency. Like they could be looking at their clock, their watch or their phone at the clock to see what time it is, to just give you in a sense that they are short on time. Or they could start the conversation by saying, "Hey, I don't have much time," but you have to judge whether or not this is a legitimate expression of shortness of time, or if they're just controlling the conversation to keep it short, so that they can dominate the conversation. But you may end up having this conversation. And they interrupt you every time you try to answer the question. Now, like that's what happened with the preacher. I tried to answer the question, he interrupted and again and again. So when you have that situation, the majority of the time, if somebody is repeatedly interrupting when you... What was that? When the person is repeatedly interrupting you while you're trying to answer a question that person asked, that means that person is being disrespectful, and really you may want to consider what you're going to do. You may want to just drop it and say to yourself, well, obviously this person isn't really interested. But if this is somebody who habitually does this with you, this means that, okay, so I've known people who, when I talk to them, they would, ask questions, like, how are you doing? What's going on? And as soon as I start to answer honestly, they start interrupting. And that could be an indication that actually they don't feel comfortable with a real answer. They're just making polite conversation when they say, how are you doing? They don't really want to hear that you had diarrhea for the last 5 days. They don't want to hear that you lost your dog while walking across the highway, and you think maybe that truck that came right by is what the reason why your dog disappeared. They don't want to hear that. So that's one thing. But if they ask a meaningful question and then they refuse to let you actually answer the question by interrupting repeatedly, they are most likely letting you know that it's not really important. And so you have the option of, if you feel it's important to the conversation, you should just push forward and not let them interrupt you again. And if they do interrupt you, say, look, you asked me a question and you have interrupted me, and I want to answer this question, so please stop interrupting me. And then just carry on. Otherwise, you can just take it as this person isn't really interested in me. Either is either it is a situational thing where they don't have the time to listen to you, or genuinely they just don't really care what you have to say. So you have to look at it. Generally speaking, does this person listen to me, or do they interrupt me and prevent me from saying the things that they're asking me about, or contributing to the conversation and stuff like that? Are they trying to override me? Because if it's a matter of they're overriding you, they're cutting you short, preventing you from carrying on with conversation and stuff, then that's an indication that there's a bad dynamic in the relationship, and that the person really doesn't care about you. But if it's just certain situations, then that's something that it may be that they really have a time constraint or some other constraint, or it may be that they have some emotional things going on that are preventing them from listening to other people. I mean, I had a friend once who was going through some significant struggles with work, and had lost her husband, and was really kind of struggling, and would talk to me, but it would interrupt me a lot, and it really made me feel like she wasn't really interested in me, and it was always about her. But she wasn't a bad person. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was all those things that had piled up in her life and made her feel like her life was out of control and stuff. And so I would be like, okay, she doesn't want to hear it, so I'll just let her talk, and I'll follow the conversation and just be supportive. And that worked, and the dynamic changed over time, but it may not always work that way. Okay, so I think so far you've got an idea of what I'm talking about here. Let me just turn to change my lighting so you can see me a little bit better, because I turned off the overhead light. There's lots of light coming in from the sun now, so who needs a light bulb? Okay, so I just had what's called a critical interruption. Well, I call it a critical interruption. I had to go to the bathroom. And that may be, that may be why an interruption occurs. Although a person, depending on their culture, their feelings about whether or not to admit that they have a critical interruption to make, like going to the bathroom or need a new sanitary napkin or anything else that could be embarrassing or considered too personal. A TMI event would be what some people would call it. That could be an interruption that isn't, it isn't a negative. It's just what it is, right? So again, you can have different kinds of interruptions. There can be interruptions that are malignant, where the person is trying to undermine you. There can be interruptions driven by embarrassment or feelings of inadequacy, where somebody tried something that you're suggesting they failed, and they are undermining you not because you're wrong, but because they failed. There can be interruptions for a number of other reasons, like it could even be that they have ADHD, or that they're bored with what you're talking about, or they have something that is very important that they feel they need to talk about with you, and a whole bunch of other reasons. Interruptions can build the conversation. They can redirect the conversation. They can destroy the conversation. It just really depends. So if somebody says to you that you should never interrupt, and this is very common in grade school, you may be in an environment where interruptions of any kind are not appreciated, and you need to evaluate whether this is the kind of environment you want to be in. If you're a grade schooler, you may not have a choice in the matter, but a lot of times it's very situational, and so don't automatically assume that somebody who's interrupting you is doing it for bad reasons or destructive reasons. And don't always assume that they're doing it for good reasons either. You have to take everything based on its context, and sometimes that context can be pretty subtle. But if you're paying attention, you may be able to figure it out. If you can't figure it out, not everybody is good at sussing out that kind of stuff. Sometimes I'm clueless, like when a woman is flirting with me, sometimes I'm like, I have no idea they're flirting with me. And sometimes a woman's not flirting with me. I think they are flirting with me. So you may not be geared to figuring that out, but you can take it to somebody else and say, somebody who's not... somebody who is going to take the time to analyze it carefully, ask questions, instead of just jump to your defense or jump to criticize you. Okay, so if you go to somebody who often criticizes you, the chances are that you may not get an accurate explanation of what's going on or what happened with the interruptions. If on the other hand, the person is always very supportive of you or protective of you, again, you probably won't get an accurate interpretation of the situation. So you want to try to find or have friends or family members who can be unbiased in giving advice, and that in itself can sometimes be challenging because some people are very manipulative and very tricky, and it's hard to even know that they're not doing it with your best interests in mind. They're doing it with their own interests in mind. So with that in mind, I'm going to interrupt this conversation by pushing the stop button. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.